Before we get into it, let me break down the tier list for you. You have operators that are broken every single round. You have operators that are useful every single round, but not necessarily broken. You have operators that are okay every round. You have operators that are situational. You have operators that are not as useful, but you could bring them. And you have operators that are just downright terrible. Now, here's the thing. The situational category could go pretty much anywhere on this list, as situational operators I don't really consider to be above or below anybody unless they're in the certain situation that they're useful in. So disregard this placement on the list. Just view it as its own little tier list off to the side. With that being said, let's get into it. Sledge's utility is going to be pretty useful every single round. There's never not going to be a point where you're going to use Sledge's utility, because you can always sledgehammer barricades, soft walls, you can do vert, you can get deployable shields, bulletproof cameras, really pretty much anything. It's just a close range frag grenade. It's pretty nice. Thatcher, you can use every single round. Even if you're not getting a wall open, you can still use ADSs to get Fenrir mines, Rooney gates, pretty much anything that's electronic, and they're always going to have something that's electronic, so you can always bring Thatcher. You could make an argument for situational, because you're only really going to need him when you get walls open, but you can always still play him if you don't, so I'm just going to put him in useful every single round. Ash's utility is not as useful, to be completely honest. Now, Ash is a pretty good operator, but this isn't an operator tier list. This is just a gadget tier list, and her gadget is just a breaching round that's range. It's nothing special. Thermite is great, but you're only going to use him in situations where you're going to need a thermite breach, so it's a situational ability. Twitch drones are okay. They have an okay ability. They shock things. You get default cameras. It's pretty okay. It's pretty nice. You're not going to be useful every single round with Twitch, because sometimes they won't bring utility for you to Twitch drone, which is why I put her, okay every round, but because you're still able to get like default cams and stuff with her, but definitely not in the same tier as like Sledge or Thatcher. Monty Shield is pretty situational. There's Rafters on Clubhouse is like the prime example of a Monty play that is pretty good, but you're only gonna find so many Monty plays, so I feel like the shield is pretty situational, especially the situational effect of do you have teammates that can play off of it or not, so situational at best. Glaz's ability is not useful, to be completely honest. I wouldn't say terrible. The ability to, see if your teammates are doing a smoke plant and then play Glaz is useful, but that's pretty much it. Fuse, same thing. Really, you're only going to play Fuse if the enemies are bringing utility that you can fuse and the situation kind of calls for it, and even then, it's not as useful. If it were a bit more useful, I might put him in situational, but even then, I don't feel like there's certain situations where a Fuse is like S tier, right? So, not as useful as the tier that Fuse is going to go in. Blitz, for the same reason as Monty, is going to go in situational. There are certain situations like rushing elbow on Oregon where Blitz can be pretty impactful, as you see in Pro League, and now it's being adopted into Ranked. So situational at best. Then we have IQ. IQ is okay every round, because you're always going to need to know where the bomb is, where default cams are, and where some electronic utility is, but not nearly as impactful as somebody like Sledge or Thatcher. Buck's utility is useful every single round. You're never not going to want a shotgun for killing people or using it for soft destruction like you would with Sledge. Blackbeard's ability is terrible. I mean, Blackbeard as an operator isn't actually that bad if you use his DMR and know how to properly use Blackbeard, but the actual ability itself is just terrible. Capitau's ability is pretty situational, I'd say. There's not a lot of places where you can use his firebolts effectively that you couldn't just use a frag grenade or Grimbees, and then the same thing goes for his smoke grenades. There's not a lot of situations where his smoke grenades would be better than just normal smoke grenades, especially because they don't last as long as normal smoke grenades, so I gotta put him in situational. Hibana, situational as well. I think most of the hard breaches are actually pretty situational. You're only really gonna bring a Hibana if you're trying to open hatches or counter castle or waste utility, but that's about it. Jackal, every single round you bring Jackal, his utility is going to be broken. I think it's just like a broken roam clear ability. I don't think anyone's disagreeing with the fact that Jackal's ability is pretty broken. Ying's ability, I think, is pretty useful every single round. You can make an argument for broken. I think Ying is just crazy. I think Ying's playstyle and the fact that Ying has hard reaching charges makes her broken, but I think because it's not an operator tier list, it's just a gadget tier list, I think the actual gadget of Ying is useful. It's not that broken. Her playstyle and all the other utility that Ying comes with makes her broken, but the actual ability, which is what we're talking about, it's a ability tier list, right, is just useful. Zophia's ability is going to be okay every round. It's literally just Ash's ability, but she also brings stuns that you can use to clear utility, which I think is pretty cool, but I don't think it's on the same tier as somebody like Thatcher or Sledge and Buck, who is going to be pretty useful every single round. Dokubi's ability is going to be broken every single round. You have one of the best roam clearing mechanics in the entire game, arguably better than Jackal. You have the ability to get defender cameras, so I think the ability is just broken hands down. Lion's ability is going to be useful every single round. I think Lion as an operator is broken, but just the ability in and of itself in a vacuum is just useful. And it has a very high skill ceiling, meaning that the more game sense you have and the more you know how to use his ability, the better and better and better he's going to be, which is why I put him so high on the tier list. Finka's ability is not as useful. I don't think she's a not as useful operator, kind of like I don't think Ashe is either, but we're purely, again, talking about ability and utility and not about the actual operator, which is why I think Finka's gadget is not as useful. The only time you're really going to want to use her is if you're A, rushing, which even then you can bring better operators, or you're trying to self-revive, or you're trying to revive your teammates, which you don't know is going to happen in the first place. So, not as useful. Maverick's ability, it's just situational. I want to say that you can use Maverick's ability every single round, but like the only reason you'd use Maverick's ability every single round that's not a round where you're using him to breach walls is to sneak in through like barricades and soft walls and stuff like that. But you can just do that with Buck and Sledge and bring more stuff with better weapons. So Maverick, situational, honestly, if you're using the blowtorch specifically just for the blowtorch, right? We're not talking about the playstyle, we're talking about specifically the gadget. The gadget itself is situational. Nomad's ability, I want to say, is okay every single round, to be honest. Like, I think Nomad is one of the most overrated operators in the game, simply because you can't reliably use Nomad for flank watch due to the fact that if somebody just slowly walks up to the air jab, they can shoot the air jab before the air jab goes off. And you can do this on every single staircase ever. The only time air jabs work and can't really be countered is when you put them super high up above doorways or under windows whenever you're trying to get ran out on. And even then, they can just impact them, so it's not really all that useful, and you can just bring claymores too and get a kill and not really get it down. So I think Nomad air jabs are pretty overrated, but if you brought them every single round, you know, they'd be okay. So I had to put her in the okay every round pick. Oh, and by the way, quick disclaimer, none of these operators are in order in their respective tiers. I'm not saying Lion is more useful than Buck. The operators in their tiers are just randomly thrown around. I'm not ordering them. The actual tiers are ordered, but the operators in the tiers are not ordered. So I don't want to hear people saying, this guy thinks that Zofia is better than Nomad, or this guy thinks that Hebana is better than Capita. No, I don't. They're just in the same tier. I didn't order them. With that out of the way, though, let's go over my next operator, which is going to be Gridlock, who I think is going to be okay every single round. I do think, honestly, that Gridlock could be used every single round. The only issue is that there's too much utility that counters Gridlock, so you can't reliably bring a Gridlock every round when you know that there's operators that have impact grenades, or you know there's operators that, like, you know, Warden that can see her through her smokes whenever she tries to get a plant down, right? So, like, there's some times where she's not going to be as useful, but I think for the most part, she's going to be okay every single round that you bring her. Nox's utility in a vacuum is actually pretty not as useful. Like, it's not good, to be honest. Now, as an operator, I think Nox is actually pretty high up there, but we're talking about utility purely in a vacuum, not as useful. The ability to dodge cams is not as useful, especially when you can literally just shoot them instead and have the same effect. Amaru's ability arguably is not as useful either. Honestly, it's probably terrible. Now, again, the ability to have a fast plant is pretty useful, especially in certain situations, which is why some people who make tier lists put her in situational. But again, we're not talking about playstyle. We're talking purely just about her ability, and it's terrible. Now, Callie, if you're using her for her ability, is actually situational. You can use Callie, but there's just going to be EMP grenades and Thatcher that is just, you know, better than Callie ever will be, and you can reliably bring them every single round. So I have to put Callie in not as useful, purely for the fact that there are other abilities that do her job, but better. Now, if we were talking about her as an operator, I'd put her in terrible, because she has a sniper that's pretty hard to use, but again, purely the ability, have to put her in not as useful. Yana's ability is actually useful every single round. I wouldn't say broken, because if you bring a mute or if you just shoot the clone, it's not like you're really doing much that our drone couldn't do, but still, you know, pretty useful ability. Ace's ability, you can use every single round. I wouldn't put it in broken, because there's a lot of counters to Ace, but you can use it every single round and get a lot of value out of it because it's a hard breacher. The reason that Ace isn't situational like the other hard breachers is because you can do more than just hard breach reliably with Ace. And because there's always a wall that needs to get open, Ace is just going to be your best solo queue hard breacher that you can get. Thermite, you need to get up close to a wall. So there's some walls like the closet wall on Oregon where you won't be able to do that because you need to be on the balcony throwing an Ace charge from safety or using Hibana from safety without running in Master and getting your head domed whenever you're trying to run to the wall like you would with Thermite. Ace, you can use his hard breach every single site, every single round, whereas Thermite, not so much, Hibana, not so much, and Maverick, not so much. Zero's ability is useful every single round. Here's the thing though. You reliably have to have teammates that will watch your cams. Or if none of your teammates are dead and you can't trust your teammates, you need to be watching your cams. And I know that most Zero players out there are not watching their own cams, which means that it's not going to be useful every round. It's just going to be okay every round. Now, I do think Zero is a really good operator. But again, we're just talking about the utility in a vacuum, and I think it's just okay. If you want flank watch, you can play Gridlock and do it a bit more reliably because you can't reliably have you or your teammates watching cams every single round unless you're just that guy. But even then, you can just use drones and do what he does. So I just want to put him in okay. I know a lot of people are going to get mad at that take, so here come the comments. Flores, I want to say, is situational. The Flores ability is great, but it's only great if you're going against utility that it can counter, which is the same exact thing for Brava. If there's no utility that you can hack, then Brava's pretty useless, and you can just play Twitch and do more than just hack utility. Plus, a lot of my teammates shoot the hacked utility anyways, so it kind of just is useless sometimes. And then same thing with Flores. If they don't have a zombie, if they don't have deployable shields, Flores isn't going to get much value as opposed to somebody like Ace, right? So, had to put them in situational. Osa, I think, is going to be useful every single round. There's never a site that I can think of where it's like an Osa wouldn't be useful here. You know what I mean? Osa shields are just great. They do the one thing that no other attacker can do, which is turning defender power positions into attacker power positions and putting deployable shields on attack. So, love Osa. I think Osa's a highly underrated operator, and I think that her ability itself is useful every single round. Senz's ability, I want to say, is situational, because the actual ability is pretty good if you have lineups for it, but other than that, the ability is pretty terrible. But because there are certain Senz lineups that you can do, I want to put Senz in situation. Grim, I think, is okay every round. Honestly, I could arguably put him in not as useful, but with the reworks, I think it's a pretty okay every round pick. If you're playing Grim every round, no one's really going to get mad at you like they would if you were playing Glaz every round, right? So the actual ability with his bees is pretty good. You can use it every single round if you wanted to. I don't really recommend it. Like, I don't really recommend one of these operators every round, except for like maybe Zofia. But like, it's okay. You know, it does the job. Ram is purely situational because you can only reliably play Ram and get a lot of value out of Ram if they're playing a site that has a roof above the site that you can play soft destruction on. Moving on to the defenders though, I think smoke is useful every single round. You're never going to find a round where a smoke canister is not going to be useful. Mute, I arguably think, is broken every round. The two operators that are seeing some of the most play in this current meta is Dokkaebi and Lion. Somebody that counters that is Mute. And in order for entry fraggers to entry frag in the first place, especially in higher elo, they need to be droned in, and Mute counters that. Not only this, but Mute can also help deny a wall. So I think he's pretty broken every single round you use him. Castle's utility is situational. You can bring a castle every round, but it's not going to get value every single round, which is why I had to put the castle barricade in situational. The pulse scanner also I want to put in situational. You're not going to use the pulse scanner unless you're playing below a site or you're playing in a site that is below another floor. Doc's utility is not as useful. Doc as an operator, sure, is pretty high on the tier list, but again, this is just about utility in a vacuum, so I had to put Doc and his stims in the not as useful tier. Rook armor is, I mean, it's hard to say. Probably not as useful with Doc as well. In lower elo, sure, it's good because you get more bullets, because you get more damage protection and you can self-revive, but in PC and especially in higher lobbies, you're not really using that much because people are actually hitting you in the head. So I want to put Rook in not as useful for right now. Capcan's utility is useful every single round. You're never not going to get use out of Capcan, because at the very least, it's slowing down the attackers by making them check every single door. So there you go. Tachanka's launcher is arguably pretty terrible. Like, the fact that they can just run through the fire, or you'll get swung with your launcher out, makes it pretty bad. I think the one thing that makes it especially bad, though, is the fact that you have to reload it, which is why I had to put it in terrible. Jaeger's utility is going to be useful every single round. You can make a case for broken, I won't blame you if you want to do that, but I don't think Jaeger has as much impact as an operator like Dokkaebi, Mute, or Jackal. Bandit's utility is situational. You can bring a bandit every round, but he's not going to be that useful. You're only going to bring a bandit if you need to keep a wall closed. The same exact thing goes for Cade as well. Frost utility is okay every round. You're not going to get as much value, especially after the nerf, but at bare minimum, you're going to get information when people shoot your traps, which is why every round she's okay. Valkyrie's ability is broken every single round. Her Valkyrie cameras are super hidden, they get a lot of information, you can throw them anywhere, and you get 3 of them. So I think her ability is pretty broken. Kev's ability is arguably pretty terrible, honestly. You could put her in not as useful, to be completely honest, but the pure ability to be silent is pretty bad. Echo's ability is okay every round. I tried playing Echo to champ, I tried making that a series, and you have no idea how difficult it was, because sure, you can use Echo every single round, but it's not like you're going to get value out of Echo every single round, even if you're properly using him like I've talked about many times. Mira's ability is situational. There's some sites that you can't bring a Mira window because no matter where you put it, it can just get shot from outside the building. A great example of this is Hookah on Coastline. You just can't play Mira there because every single place you put a Mira window, it can get shot from the roof, from a drone hole, or from outside. Legion's ability is useful every single round. You can never bring a Legion and it be useless. Ella's ability is not as useful. The reason for this being is because now people are able to turn off their screen shake intensity, so literally all Ella's ability does is make it to where you don't have sound and your brightness is dimmed a little bit, which is really, really bad. Vigil's ability is actually okay every single round. Honestly, I want to put Vigil's ability in useful every single round. The issue with Vigil is, as an operator, if you take into account all things like loadout and playstyle and meta, Vigil's not that good of an operator right now, especially compared to other people like Solus. But Vigil's actual ability by itself, we're not talking about other pieces of the loadout, we're not talking about the meta, we're not talking about other operators, just the ability itself is useful every single round. The ability to not get droned is great. The only issue is that Vigil's utility has gotten nerfed so much to the point that even if you do activate the ability, it'll probably still know where you are, which is why I have to put him in okay every round and not useful. I tricked you. Maestro's ability is... this is a tough one. I could put him in useful every round, I could put him in okay every round, and I also could put Maestro in situational. But to be completely honest, I want to put Maestro in okay every round for the exact same reason as Echo. Is Maestro a bit better than Echo in my opinion? Sure. But it's not going to be as useful every single round as somebody like Thatcher, as somebody like Smoke, as somebody like Ace. The same can be said for Alibi's ability. Now, Alibi as an operator is definitely lower, but again, this is an ability purely in a vacuum, and I think the ability to have pings for absolutely free, especially if you pair it up with observation blockers, is super useful every single round. Not as useful as these operators, or especially these operators, but it's okay. Clash's ability is purely situational, for the exact same reasons as these other two shield operators here. Mozzie's ability is useful every single round. The ability to take over drones, especially operator drones, and make them into your drones is pretty nice. Warden's ability is not as useful. Warden has the exact same ability as Glaz, so I had to put him in the same tier. Goyo's ability is useful every single round you play Goyo. You get a bunch of fire, you're able to waste up to 80 seconds per round with pure fire. That's huge. Wamai's ability is useful every single round, because no matter what operators the enemies are playing, your Wamai discs will at least catch something, which is useful every round. Oryx's actual ability is terrible. I'm not saying Oryx is a terrible operator, but again, these are abilities purely in a vacuum, so Oryx's ability is just terrible. Melusi's ability is okay every round. I think Melusi, honestly, is just a worse version of Fenrir, whose ability is broken every single round. Fenrir is just crazy. It's Melusi, but better, and the actual utility that you pair it up with is better, but can't talk about that because this is just a utility perspective. So 5 pieces of utility, they blind and deafen attackers, and you can activate 3 of them at a time. Broken. I mean hands down, just crazy broken. Aruni's ability, this might get me some hate. I think Aruni's ability is okay every round. Honestly, you could make an argument for not as useful. The reason being is there's just too many things that counter Aruni gates, and you find that most rounds her Aruni gates are never active because it takes one person with flash grenades to counter all 3 Aruni gates, just like that. And every single round, there's going to be more than one person that can counter you. They're going to have a Thatcher. They're going to have EMP grenades. They're going to have drones. They're going to have utility they can throw in the Aruna gates. They're going to have flash grenades, like I said earlier. Or they can just walk through the Aruna gates. So they're not that useful. They're just okay every single round. Thunderbird's ability, not as useful. It's a healing ability. Those aren't really good in a one-shot headshot game. So that's the reason I put her, Doc, and Rook in the not as useful category. Thorn's ability, not as useful. Same reason as Ella's. It's just kind of underwhelming. Azami's ability, broken every single round you use it. Arguably the most broken ability in the entire game. I feel like I don't even need to explain myself any further. It's Azami. Everyone saw this coming. Solus's ability is also broken every single round. You make it to where they don't get to have a prep phase. That's crazy. You also make it to where if you're standing somewhere, they don't get to drone that spot. You can also deny plants. You can give your teammates information on where they're pushing, how many people are pushing, what utility they're pushing with. It's a crazy ability. Turbo Rouse ability is situational. You're only going to use Turbo Rouse ability if you have the ability with Bandit or with Cade, or even without them, you're just trying to keep a wall closed, which again is situational. But that's pretty much it for the entire ability tier list. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments if you disagree with me, if you hate me. My name's Alka. Check out this next video, and I hope I'll see you there. Later.